order. Welcome to meeting number 48 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs.
Our first meeting, and we're still in January of 2023. I wish everyone a Happy New Year. Really excited, containing my excitement because there's so much there to be doing this again with all of you. And especially because the committee is meeting today to begin its study on electoral boundary reports. We will begin by considering the draft reports for Prince Edward Island and Newfoundland and Labrador, and then pause. So I understand that we've all gone through the two reports and that there are no changes and that we can pass them as they have been provided to us. With a nodding of heads. Brilliant. So we will proceed. Thank you to the analysts for doing the tremendous work as always. We also just need to pass the three budgets for the studies. And so I'm just going to make sure that we're okay with the budget expenses.
They don't have them, but there's $1,500 each.
It's about $1,500 each. You don't have them, we'll circulate them around. It's just the budget that we would normally pass as we usually do. Just so we can have, we should really talk about the food that we receive, but today's not that day. Are we okay? Perfect. We should also welcome Miriam. Miriam will be the clerk who will be supporting our committee moving forward. We have a little bit of a duplication for a bit because I really do want to thank Justin for his leadership in bringing us to this point. Justin, I gave you a shout out in the House yesterday. Really do appreciate just you being available and just the fact that it's also, you know, I don't work 9 to 5. And you have been available to me outside of 9 to 5. So really do thank you. You should never be a stranger to PROC. I understand that we're going to have you for this month before you're really gone. So please don't go away too quickly. But yes. And luckily we get to keep Justin and, no, we get to keep Andre and Laurence. So welcome back to our analysts. So now we will actually proceed to hearing witnesses and colleagues to discuss the reports. First, we'll start with New Brunswick, followed by Nova Scotia. 1 second. So let's actually make this be efficient like we usually are at this committee. And today I would like to welcome Mr. John Williamson to our committee. Mr. Williamson and I once sat together beside each other at a committee, and it was a great conversation. So, Mr. Williamson, I understand that you've been provided with about 6 questions that the committee would like you to address. And so hopefully you can do that within your comments. I see that you've come prepared, but you used your time as one of our honourable colleagues. You'll have up to 5 minutes to share the comments you'd like to share. Any questions of those 6 that were provided to you that you might not hit upon, we'll try to get within the question and answer round. And so with that, I will pass the floor over to you for up to 5 minutes. Welcome to PROC.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I appreciate being here today. I'd like to first of all thank members of this committee for hearing me today. And I also want to recognize New Brunswick Commission for its work in the redistribution process. Although I'm bringing forth an objection today, I want to note I think the Commission did a very good job respecting our communities of interest, creating ridings of a reasonable and comparable size, and for listening to citizens with recommendations to the 10 proposed riding maps. The crux of my objection is that I don't believe the proposed new name, St. John St. Croix, accurately reflects the whole of the riding outlined in the report, and the current name, New Brunswick Southwest, should continue to be used as it has almost continuously since 1997. I state this because most of the communities in the riding will not identify with the St. John St. Croix label. And within the riding, there are multiple communities that do not lie near the St. Croix River, nor are they part of St. John. These include areas like the Belle Isle, Oppahawk, and Studholme in the east of the riding near and towards Sussex. as well as St. George, Macy's Bay, Blacks Harbor, in the east of Charlotte County, which is in the southern part of the riding, plus Tracy and Fredericton Junction in Sunbury County, which is south of Fredericton, as well as Gagetown in the northeast of the riding. Moreover, some of our province's oldest communities to the south, namely Campobello, Deer Island, Grand Manan, and Whitehead Islands, these are 4 important islands, are also completely overlooked by this new name, and they should certainly be represented in the riding description. Meanwhile, the name New Brunswick Southwest accurately reflects the whole of the region being represented, including the additions. And the name New Brunswick Southwest, I believe, should continue to be used. Most of the regions lying within the proposed boundaries of St. John, St. Croix are already being represented under the new name, under the name New Brunswick Southwest. And the 2 major areas that are being added, Burton Parish, which is to the east of Fredericton, as well as the west side of the city of St. John, lie westerly and southerly of areas that are already part of New Brunswick Southwest. And I believe you've been handed maps that will illustrate this. It might not be obvious, but the additions are here and here. The rest of the riding is the same New Brunswick Southwest. And it's for these reasons I contend that it is appropriate, in this case, to continue to use New Brunswick Southwest. It's a name that is known province-wide. It is known by the voters in this that fall within both the existing as well as the proposed new riding. And as well, I'm just going to quote to end this from page 11 of the Commission's own report, which noted that the Commission sought to retain the current riding names whenever appropriate. I believe it is more than appropriate to maintain the name New Brunswick Southwest because of its history, its accuracy, and I also think it's a name that people understand that they live within and represents them. I will turn briefly to some of these questions. Obviously, there's no demographic impact here. I have talked to a number of mayors and councillors about the name. I think there's broad agreement that New Brunswick Southwest has worked very, very well to include the many, many communities that make up this large rural riding, and it could continue to be used. On that note, I will end. I look forward to your questions if you have any, and I hope you will consider my request that you support that we maintain the name New Brunswick Southwest. Thank you.
Mr. Williamson, we thank you for that presentation and taking the time to appear in front of this committee and to share those comments. I will just note for colleagues that there was a map that was referred to that was shared. It is not entirely in the 2 official languages, and as you know, I've kind of been consistent in that stance. So until something is entirely in 2 official languages, we will not circulate it to this committee. But we will.
May I? It is in 2 official languages. I mean, some cities just don't have translation, but you can see Bay of Fundy is Bay of Fundy. Tracy.
To us is?
Okay.
Okay.
Inside.
I'm pretty confident that when we so it's a point, and I think that as a country with 2 official languages, it is something that I think we just need to be consistent on. So we appreciate it. We can circulate around. We'll make sure it's in 2 official languages so that people can see it. I just don't want committee members to wonder why. I will provide you that reason. So we will now go into 6-minute rounds, and obviously we're amongst colleagues, so there's a little bit more informalcy here, as long as we can make sure one person is speaking at a time and we don't interrupt for the purpose of translation and interpretation. And we will get to start with Mr. Perkins. Welcome to PROC.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's a pleasure to be here and a pleasure to hear from our colleagues. Mr. Williamson, I don't know if you know this or not, but I was born in St. John, so New Brunswick. So even though I represent a Nova Scotia riding, I have some familiarity with it. And obviously, in the naming or the renaming as proposed by the commission of your riding, do you think, the province of New Brunswick contains both the city of St. John and the river of St. John? And so in trying to figure this out in their naming, do you think perhaps they got confused or thinking it was just the river, and therefore why would we name, we'll name part of the river since that's a dividing line now in the proposal. Was that part of the confusion?
Well, you're onto something. There is, of course, the St. John River, but New Brunswick residents are quite specific. We refer to St. John as St. John, and given that the Commissioner's report is proposing to have St. John City represented by 2 members of Parliament, the understanding, I think perception out there is that it's referring to the city of St. John. Because to finish my thought, New Brunswick household individuals are quite specific. When we're talking about the river, we refer to St. John River. Whereas the St. Croix is also a river because there is no confusion. So the St. Croix can be called St. Croix. Everyone knows what it is on the which is the river that separates New Brunswick from Maine. Whereas St. John, if you say that to any New Brunswick voter, they're going to assume you mean the city, not the river. But even if the commissioners meant river, I still think my objection holds in that there are still large parts of this riding that are far from the river, in particular in the east of the riding, the Sunbury County, which is south of Fredericton, as well as those 4 islands that I mentioned in the Bay of Fundy. But I'll also point out that even a reference to St. John River is contention, as there are currently campaigns by Indigenous and other groups to rename the St. John River Woolastook, which is a traditional Indigenous name. And in my opinion, it would not be wise for the Redistribution Commission to get involved in this debate on either side. So even renaming it St. John, I mean the river, I think is entering a debate that is currently ongoing in the province.
We have a St. Croix River, a St. John River, and a city of St. John, but no town or village of St. Croix. There's a lot of confusion in the media, too, on this, and the commission. So is that part of it, or?
So So first of all, it's St. Croix.
St. Croix.
Although this riding was briefly referred to as. No, I realize. Well, look, it was originally St. Croix Island is the place, just for a little history lesson, where Champlain spent his first winter. But now, in the kind of local dialect, it is referred to as St. Croix. It would tug on my ears to hear this riding referred to as St. Croix in the House of Commons, and so that is another danger. And I know that could happen because briefly this riding was referred to as St. Croix Belle Isle. Pardon me, St. Croix Belle Isle. I'm being Ottawa washed here. But every time the speaker recognized the former member Greg Thompson, he asked for the member from St. Croix Belle Isle. Now, I always wondered who this member from Quebec was until, of course, Greg stood up, and which is why he promptly reversed the name when he was a member of Parliament to get it back to New Brunswick Southwest. But let me address the kind of what I'll call a bit of confusion about what actually makes up New Brunswick Southwest. In local media, when these maps were released, the media really just referred to the area between St. John and St. Croix as forming New Brunswick Southwest. It was a bit infuriating for myself, knowing the riding includes much, much more geography than that. But I also noticed that reporters kept referring to Charlotte County and only St. John as being part of the new riding, which is false. So I do worry that the name that's being posed inaccurately describes what is this large rural riding, whereas this part of the province is referred to either by its current federal riding name, New Brunswick Southwest, or even informally as Southwest New Brunswick. Southwest New Brunswick is what you hear in the dock, Southwest, Southwest New Brunswick. So again, this name is accurate from a cultural point of view, from a geographical point of view, and New Brunswick Southwest also accurately includes all of the voters, all of the communities, all the municipalities that currently and will make up the new riding after April of 2024. But thank you for your questions, Mr. Perkins.
Thank you for that fruitful exchange. Mrs. Sahota, 6 minutes to you. Up to.
Thanks for presenting here today, Mr. Williamson. Your reasoning is understandable. I can understand why you wouldn't want to create confusion for the residents of your riding of New Brunswick Southwest. The name, however, the Electoral Boundaries Commission, it argues that this is a more historically appropriate name. So my first question is what you would say in response to that, and whether you think it would be appropriate to have the commission give their side of their reasoning.
You could certainly ask them. I of course would never shy away from that discussion. Look, there's no doubt that the names St. Croix and St. John are historically significant. St. Croix because it is the boundary line between the United States in Canada, and St. John because it's our country's first incorporated city. So these are important historical places. And as I said in the previous answer, St. Croix Island is important not just for this riding, but for all of Canada, and for French-speaking Canadians in particular, being the first settlement ahead of even Quebec City. So it is an important part of our country's history, but that doesn't mean it accurately reflects this riding. St. Croix Island is recognized by Parks Canada at the mouth of the Bay of Fundy for that settlement. St. John is its municipality. So while I think these are important historical places, I don't think that automatically means we should apply them to a riding. And what I've learned in this riding, it's approximately 10,000 square kilometers, and it's the largest municipality is about 6,000 people, to give you a sense. So it's really a lot of small communities. Grand Man is 2,000, Campobello 900 people, Whitehead a couple of dozen. I can go on, but you can understand that once you get past the three municipalities or 6,000, the size falls to 2,000 and then just hundreds. So it is many, many communities. And as I traveled it, particularly when I first started, the thing that kept coming back to me, people I think struggle a little bit. Why am I part of New Brunswick Southwest and not Fredericton, not St. John, not Sussex, or whatever? So New Brunswick Southwest is a name that I think binds people together. And these symbols are important. And I do worry that if we adopt the name St. John, St. Croix, a large number of municipalities are just going to feel they're not represented by the label. And while that won't make a difference in terms of how I vote and representation, I think it does have a symbolic value that's important.
And as many MPs do, it seems like you know your riding very well, and of course you want to be inclusive and represent that riding. Your arguments seem to be very familiar to me because these arguments were also raised in Bill S-207, brought forward by member MP Shanahan regarding Chateauguay-L'École. Very similar arguments were made because L'École didn't happen to be a part of her riding. There was debate in the House. There was a vote after that debate. You voted against her being able to change the name of her riding. Why would that be? Because I do think it's so important to be able to identify your riding appropriately, but in that instance you felt that it wasn't appropriate for the member to change the name for very similar reasons.
So you're asking me?
Yes.
You're asking me
why you voted against allowing for that name change when it was based on very similar reasons that you're making here today?
Well, I think that the member who you referenced had an opportunity to pocket the wind. There was an agreement amongst our whips that that could be carried in a voice vote. The member, I think, wrongly rejected that compromise, that deal, and so it went. So she took her bill to the whole House, and it was not a whip vote on our side. but our caucus did vote as one.
You're correct. Your caucus did vote as one. Also, the NDP, the Bloc as well, voted nay in that instance. And I'm sure throughout this process, we're going to hear a lot of people bring up name changes. And I think it's very important to be able to allow. From what I understand, the member was not aware that just previous to the vote that this agreement had been made, or previous to her decision on whether to call for a recorded vote or a voice call, was not informed. And so is it just politics then, or is it important to be able to accomplish the goal of having constituents be able to identify themselves as being included in their riding? Because I think that should be the end goal. Right now, we're also using parliamentary resources, parliamentary time in order to discuss this very important issue, and I'm sure others will come forward. So I just don't quite understand why that wasn't allowed for.
I'm not familiar with the discussions that went back and forth between the House leaders and the whips on this. My view has always been in Parliament, if you're afforded an opportunity to take the win, you take the win and you pocket it. And you don't go to Parliament needlessly to put forward a bill that could have been passed quickly and efficiently. So that was the decision of either the member, the whip, the House leader on the government side. I don't know who. That's not up to me. But I voted with my colleagues, and it seems all opposition members on this.
But it was
and
not.
And let me just finish. I mean, the member should have a chance, perhaps, if she's still interested, to bring this forward in another bill if there's government legislation.
But it was not a whipped vote, so it
So-
was essentially up to you at the end of the day as to how you voted. So I find that
Okay.
interesting because I
Thank
do
you.
think your proposal is important.
Excellent. So thank you. Time is up, and we appreciate that exchange as always. Madame Gaudreau,
Ms. Gaudreau,
jusqu'à 6 minutes pour...
you have up to 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Probably take very little time. We're just starting out, and we're starting out on a fairly lengthy process. And I'm hopeful that we'll be able to do what we're supposed to do as a committee, which is speak to the main points that the members are raising when they come before us, and to have questions that allow us to go into great depth, such as the questions that we have before us now. So I hope that we can all be respectful and remain focused on the issues that are raised. Now, our colleague did raise some issues, and at this point in time, I don't have any other questions, really. I would just say that sometimes we talk about the impact of changes, whether they're inclusive or not. And so I think what I'll do is give my colleague an opportunity to take a couple of minutes to just expand on those points so that we better understand them. Thank you very much. Then very briefly, I did mention that in New Brunswick we have St. John, and then we have St. John River. A comparison, if you were to take Quebec, would be that there is Quebec and then there is Quebec City. And those two names tell us something different, and the same thing applies to us. Sometimes you're talking about the river, St. John River, and sometimes you're talking about the city, and the city is called St. John. So that's really just to underscore the message that in this case we're talking about the city and not the river. But even if you were talking about the river, I feel, and many voters feel, that it's lacking. It doesn't make sense because there are several islands and municipalities that fall outside the area of those two rivers. Thank you.
Donc c'est bien apprécié.
Thank you. That's much appreciated, Ms. Gaudreau. Ms. Blaney, you have up to 6 minutes.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and I appreciate that, and I thank the member for coming in and sharing a lot of information about his riding. I have one question, so it probably won't take us very long. I'm just wondering if you have support from your communities, mayors, Indigenous leaders, for the objection that you've brought forward.
So thank you for that question. So because I'm not proposing or any change to the actual boundary itself, I think the commissioners did a good job working to ensure that New Brunswick's three cities are roughly the same size in terms of representation, and similarly, the rural ridings are, broadly speaking, equitable. The most I can say to your question, because I've not done broad consultation on the name change, I have spoken to individual community leaders, and there is broad agreement that New Brunswick Southwest has worked well. People know it, and for that reason, there's really no sense in changing it. As for the question around the Woolastook and the renaming of St. John River, that is a debate that's centered in Fredericton amongst Indigenous groups as well as academics. So it's not one where I've spoken directly to anyone on it, but my sense of the politics is because of the questions around the St. John River renaming at Woolastook. This is, I think, this is a contentious issue. I'll put it that way, and it's one the Commission, I think, is best to avoid. And if I may just take another 30 seconds, as a fiscal conservative as well, I'd be loath to have to spend these thousands of dollars that will be required on the name change. Like many of you, I have signs at my constituency office, exterior and signs throughout the riding that bear the name New Brunswick Southwest, and I think it would be unfortunate if those monies would have to be spent just because we're needlessly making a name change, and I think choosing a name, or perhaps if we go with St. John St. Croix, going for a name that is less representative and one that if I'm not successful today, we'll hopefully continue. We'll continue to work to try to get the name New Brunswick Southwest. So it could be an unfortunate fiscal decision as well. A minor point, I realize it's not even a drop in the bucket of the federal government's budget, but it is one that I'm cognizant of as well.
Thank you. I have no more questions, Chair.
Excellent. I will go around again because we have a little bit of time, but I just am looking at the 6 questions that were shared with colleagues, and just to maintain some structure and order, as I always endeavor to do at this committee. I feel like question 2 was one that Mrs. Blaney just asked. The number 5 question is your objection a repeated argument made before the Commission or a new one? I believe, based on your answer, that it has been shared with the Commission during the first period. The question then I would just ask to make sure we get it on the record is, have you talked to your colleagues about these proposed changes? If so, do they agree?
Thank you. I only talked to the colleagues that signed the form that was required for this committee to appear. So that is a very good question. I have not consulted with my Liberal colleagues in New Brunswick. That was an oversight. I suspect, just given our good nature back home, they would have no objection to this, but I can't speak to this. But I do think my concern about the Woolastook would hit home with the member with Jenica Atwin. She speaks passionately about these issues, and she could have the same concern I have, but I have not spoken to her about that. I have spoken to the Conservatives. They do support it, as do members of my community.
Excellent. I thank you for that answer. We're just going to use the time that we have with you, which is not much, but we'll go really quickly around one time. Started with Mr. Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good to see you, Mr. Williamson. With respect to Madame Shanahan's bill, I would note that there were other processes available to that member that she refused to use. But in any event, we're speaking about your riding, Mr. Williamson, and could you remind the committee how long your riding has been called New Brunswick Southwest?
Thank you. Almost continuously since 1997, so 25 years. As I mentioned, it was The New Brunswick Commission at one point tried to change that name and did, for an election cycle, change it to St. Croix, Belle Isle, which was frequently mislabeled St. Croix Belle-Île, ici dans la Chambre des Communes.
Here in the House of Commons.
And it was promptly returned to New Brunswick Southwest. So I think I say almost continuously since 1997, 25 years.
And I actually believe, I stand to be corrected, but I believe it was very briefly Charlotte at the time of the 1997 election, and was then changed to New Brunswick Southwest. But I know you had a map that will be soon distributed to the committee, but just to, again, understand the geography of your riding, it really goes from essentially West St. John all the way to the U.S. border and along the U.S. border, and then stretches essentially into communities that are situated near Fredericton and would include counties such as Charlotte, Kings, Queens, York, Sunbury. So really that, from the standpoint of accurately describing where the riding is geographically situated, that is southwest New Brunswick, or New Brunswick Southwest. And I would also just note, and maybe you wish to comment, York, Sunbury, Charlotte at various times have been included in the names of federal ridings.
So I agree with virtually everything you said, except because of this new proposed name, St. Croix St. John, you're making the same oversight that the media makes. This whole area in the east. So St. John then runs the border. In fact, St. John will kind of be the center of the riding, and the river kind of runs north from there. So whether you want to choose the city or the river, there's lots of area in the center. But in the east as well here, it doesn't run from St. John to the main border. It actually runs from Sussex to the main border. And when the highway was built, I'm getting very local now, the Route 1 highway, which was the Atlantic Gateway into New England, that begins in Sussex and runs through what is called locally southwest New Brunswick. And the federal riding is New Brunswick Southwest. So the current riding name really does speak to the local geography, and all the municipalities from Sussex all the way to the main border that are included in southwest New Brunswick, or the federal name New Brunswick Southwest. Thank you.
Hawkins, quickly. You have to start speaking.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Williamson, if you had to choose a path to make your riding inclusive, I think you're choosing to go back to the former riding name, which I think you've made the argument for. Arguments have been made here about the process, but if you were to make that rural riding inclusive in another way, you would have to basically add on to St. John, St. Croix, a number of other smaller communities, which would make a riding name that would take several minutes for the speaker to get through. We already have some ridings like that, and I'll just highlight, for example, we don't list the neighborhoods in Brampton in our federal jurisdiction, in our federal riding names. We have Brampton Centre, Brampton South, Brampton East, Brampton North, and Brampton West. So it would only seem logical that we would keep doing things in the rural areas as seemingly intelligently as we do things in the urban areas, don't you think?
I do, and I think that is an excellent point in that we could add more names to it, which would just make it more cumbersome. But I do want to press against just how names matter. I mean, when you meet someone, a constituent, a voter, it's important that we get their names right and we pronounce them correctly. The danger with St. Croix is it will be referred to as, or pardon me, St. Croix, I'm doing it there, I'm in Ottawa, is it will be referred to as St. Croix. And that is not correct. It is St. Croix in my area. And as I said, I'll just finish up. I'm not joking that when I heard St. Croix Belle-Île watching the House of Commons when Greg was a member, after the name changed, I thought it was a Quebec riding until I saw Greg stand, which is, I think, the reason why he changed it.
Thank you, Mr. Williamson. Madame Romanado.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you so much, MP Williamson, for being here today. I just want to follow up on the question of community support for maintaining the name. On page 11 of the report, it says that with respect to the changing of the name, it was yourself and another concerned citizen who had written into the commission to say that they were not in agreement with changing the name. And I wanted to know what kind of outreach you've done, if any, with your community, because this report was tabled on June 2nd. I'm assuming you've perhaps had a householder or a 10%er or something that you've put out in your constituency since June. Did you reach out to the community, get some support? Because we didn't receive anything at this committee furthering your point about keeping the name. We just want to make sure that the people in your community are in favor of maintaining the name, or are they okay with the Commission's recommendation? And I'm sorry, as a Quebecer, I'm going to say Saint John Saint Croix. Thank you.
Non, puis je comprends.
And I understand. In Canada, it's Saint Croix or Saint Croix, but where we come from, it's a Saint Croix.
Look, I did not do a 10% or a householder survey on this. My discussions have been informal with community leaders. So, or I shouldn't say community leaders, just community representatives, I think is a better term. Southwest New Brunswick is also in fishing communities. It also designates an area, the Southwest. As I said, the Southwest New Brunswick is one that outside of politics encompasses a certain region, and that's why I think again, I'm repeating myself, New Brunswick Southwest works. So my discussions have been informal, and I have found no one that thinks the new riding name is something we should embrace.
Okay, so just I want to make sure that if we go ahead with if we agree with the commission and they change the name, are we going to receive a whole bunch of letters afterwards? I just wanted to make sure that we wanted to know that some public outreach had been done. With that, I think I'm going to turn it over to see if any of my colleagues have a follow-up. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Mr. Williamson. I've always admired your French as a member from Quebec. I truly appreciate it when members from outside the province that represent other Francophone communities or Francophone populations continue to speak in the other official language. So congratulations on that. Now, my question has to do with the name of your riding. I understand your point of view, and that is that you would like to maintain that name. And perhaps that's something that this committee should hear and be able to agree on. I would think that you're not the only person who is or could be affected by a name change, and that is in conflict with the name that you would like to keep or preserve. Now, I just want to say I don't quite understand your logic on something. If your riding is renamed, and Saint John Saint Croix, or Saint Jean Saint Croix, the people are just going to think about Quebec. I mean, there's Saint Albert and Edmonton. We know full well that it's another area of the country where French is spoken. There's Saint Boniface, Saint Vital as well, Saint Boniface, Saint Vital. People don't necessarily make the mistake of thinking that it may be in Ontario or in New Brunswick. And I would imagine that Anglophones pronounce a name one way and Francophones another. They will be pronouncing the name of your riding with that English sound, and Francophones will pronounce it differently. Well, thank you very much. Do you know, it's thanks to our immersion system in New Brunswick that I can speak French today. And it's also because I make that effort here in Parliament. Now, you're raising a political issue in New Brunswick. If I can respond, In the Southwest, there aren't very many Francophones. In fact, there are very few. In the South, you find that there are more Anglophones. Moncton is a bilingual city, and you find Acadians and Francophones in the North. So when, for example, there's news from Parliament, we want two things. We want our name to be pronounced, and we want our region to be pronounced properly, whether it's on CBC New Brunswick or anywhere else. So I'm talking about a local issue, but I represent these areas. I represent families of New Brunswick Southwest. Thank you very much. Ms. Godreau. Thank you. I don't think my colleague opposite had enough time. Perhaps he would like to reply to that, so I'm going to give him my time if he wants it. Why are you saying no? Microphone. So you're saying that I have 2.5 minutes? And we're up to 2 minutes. Well, then then I just wanted to be able to provide some time to my colleague if he needed more time.
Turnbull wanted to go next, but it's taking more time.
Merci.
Well, thank you very much, Ms. Godreau, for your kindness. Then, once again, I imagine Francophones in New Brunswick, Acadians, if they are historically Acadians, have their presence. There are also immigrants from outside the province who decide to move to New Brunswick because it is the only bilingual province in Canada with 2 official languages. And I would think that Francophones are free to move to your riding and continue to speak their language, and I would think that they would have the right to continue to refer to New Brunswick Southwest or Saint-Jean-Saint-Croix as they wish to pronounce it. And you're not opposed to that. No, absolutely not. And that's not what I was saying. I'm simply saying that you've raised an issue that really isn't necessarily necessary. New Brunswick Southwest works perfectly well without the confusion being added that will be raised when, for example, the Speaker of the House stands up when the majority of the voters in that riding are listening and will say Sainte Croix. That's not a name that they identify with for the vast majority of those voters. But I will say, if you're talking about New Brunswick Southwest or Nouveau Brunswick Sud-Ouest, well, we're well represented then. So this is a debate in New Brunswick. Yes, we are a bilingual province. Absolutely. No debate on that. No discussion on that. However, being bilingual means that where we come from, we can speak English or French. Thank you very much. Ms. Blaney.
Thank you, Madam
Mrs. Blaney, thank you. With that, Mr. Williamson, I would like to thank you for your time with committee. We will make sure your information is circulated around in both official languages. And if you have anything else to share, as always, let us know. With that, we will pause really quickly because our next panel is actually in person, so that should not take too much time. Correct? Awesome. 30 seconds to 1 minute, and we'll be back. Have a great day. Second panel on federal electoral boundary report. This one is brought to you by Nova Scotia, and I would like to welcome Minister Sean Fraser. I would like to welcome Lena Metlej-Diab, as well as Jaime Batiste. Colleagues, you will have, colleagues, you will have up to 5 minutes for your opening comments. You will hear a beep beep, which would mean that you have used more than those 5 minutes. So it'd be really good that we not hear the beep beep. With that, we are going to start with Minister Sean Fraser. Are you ready to go?
Whenever you tell me, Chair.
Excellent. Up to 5 minutes to you. Welcome to PROC.
Thanks very much, colleagues. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I'm here to register my objection formally to the Commission's Electoral Boundaries Report for Nova Scotia insofar as it impacts the federal riding of Central Nova and the proposed creation of Pictou Eastern Shore. Rick, you'll have a familiarity with the communities I'm talking about, and perhaps if I could lean on you to let people know what the local dynamics might mean once I make my submissions, that would be helpful. There's some substantive complaints about
Rappel au règlement,
the
Madame la
rearrangement.
Présidente.
Oh.
Pouvons-nous demander à notre collègue de parler?
Could we ask our colleague, please, to speak a little more slowly? I'm just thinking of the interpreters who are trying to keep up.
I've got substantive complaints and I've got procedural complaints, and I hope you'll consider them in earnest. On the substantive side, there was a decision taken by the Commission to separate the communities of Pictou County and Antigonish, which have historical links. There was a decision to annex the entirety of Antigonish County to virtually the entire island of Cape Breton, and there was a decision to extend what's largely a small town and rural community riding into essentially suburban Halifax, which will create difficulties for whoever the Member of Parliament will be in the future to effectively represent communities that don't necessarily share interests. On the procedural side, I was really disappointed, frankly, although I don't think it was a mistake made on purpose, that certain communities, including the Pictou Landing First Nation community and important historic African Nova Scotian communities that were not given an opportunity to give input, as well as the vast majority of municipalities in the community who unanimously have indicated their deep dissatisfaction with the process and the result, some of which have actually adopted formal motions, and I'm happy to get into that in more detail. On the substantive side, the separation of Pictou County and Antigonish to people who live there, it doesn't make sense. The communities have very similar economies in terms of their reliance on the fishery on the North Shore of Nova Scotia. If you can picture the stretched water between Nova Scotia and PEI, they share literally in the tourism sector that the same organization represents the interests of the Northumberland Strait and the Eastern Shore of Nova Scotia, which roughly mirror the existing federal constituency now. And you'll see that these sort of small towns, somewhere between 2,000, 4,000, 5,000 people surrounded by rural communities, have very similar backgrounds in terms of their social and economic features. The decision to attach Antigonish to Cape Breton is frankly stunning to me when I actually look at the changes that have been made to the map. In particular, since great changes were not initially proposed to the ridings in Cape Breton, and Antigonish came out in significant numbers and opposed almost unanimously the initial proposal to extend the boundary from Cape Breton into mainland Nova Scotia because they felt it would be difficult for a person to represent both Antigonish and Cape Breton. The Commission recognized this in their report. They said there was some commentary on the Strait region in Cape Breton having commonalities with Antigonish. That's true, but then they changed the map to attach Antigonish to almost all of Cape Breton. So what you've essentially got now is communities that are 5, 6 hours away in some instances that have no real common economy or common political issues to communities that do not attach themselves to one another. If you ask people in Antigonish, they are very much not from Cape Breton, though they love it very much, and it simply doesn't make sense. On the other side of the riding, I'm from northern Nova Scotia, and I cover a big part of the Atlantic coast on the northeastern part of the province. There's a decision to make up the population that would extend it closer to the city. The boundary would become essentially Cole Harbour. Rick, you'll appreciate the nuance of this being on the other side of the city. The issues that come up in that part of the province more deal with are they receiving municipal services from Halifax, the only major city in Nova Scotia? Are there public transit stops available for people who commute to the city for work? The economy is largely driven by people who work in the city but live in the area. Further down the Eastern Shore, where I represent today, a lot of communities are based on the fishery or traditional primary industry and mining or agriculture if you go into the Musquodoboit Valley. I have some problems with the name as well that I can get to in questions. I've only got about 30 seconds left. Very quickly on my procedural objection, and I raised this during my presentation to the committee, there's First Nations communities that were not consulted that are not happy about the result. The African Nova Scotian community, in one instance I received a letter this morning from Daryl Sampson. A decision was taken to draw the boundary in a way that actually separates the largest family centre from a community that very much wants to be in the same riding. It's a beautiful community. It would be an honor to represent them. They don't want to be in my riding, and a decision was taken without their input that impacts them negatively, and I think we should reject the proposal on that basis. Madam Chair, I'm 4 seconds over, so I'll cut my comments there.
Well, there might be a time difference, but I still have 4 seconds on this side for you. But
I'll use it to say thank you.
Excellent. With that, Madame Diab, jusqu'à 5 minutes pour vous.
Ms. Diab, you have to 5 minutes. Thank you very much, and have a good year.
Je m'excuse, mes remarques.
My apologies. My 5-minute speaking notes will take 5 minutes, and it will be in English.
Service. I'm here today to note objections to the final report of the Electoral Boundaries Commission for Nova Scotia. I've received letters and emails from residents who are concerned about the Commission's proposed boundaries. These letters have come from an MLA, City Councillor, Chamber of Commerce, Seniors Association, many other organizations. I have all the names in front of me. I tried to send some of them in for translation purposes, others, and they keep sending them to me. So today I'm here to voice those concerns because at this point in the process, it's only members of parliament who are the only ones who can object to the boundaries. These boundaries matter to people, and they deserve to have their concerns heard. I've submitted a full briefing note to the committee, including some examples of the letters that I received in maps, contextualizing data from the 2021 census. And so today I'll go over my objections in brief. I've got 2 substantive complaints and 1 procedural. First, Halifax West is a diverse community of interest. The Electoral Boundaries Readjustment Act, Section 15, 1BI, directs the Commission to consider community of interest or community of identity in the historical pattern of an electoral district when drawing electoral boundaries. Halifax West has a well-established community of new immigrants and minority racial, cultural, ethnic, religious, and linguistic groups. It has been an exceptionally diverse riding in Nova Scotia for decades. Put succinctly, HRM, Halifax Regional Municipality, is a pocket of diversity in Nova Scotia, and Halifax West is a pocket of greater diversity within that. This merits protection and meaningful representation. The proposed federal electoral boundaries divide the community by removing a particularly diverse area referred to as Larry-Utek area from the riding of Halifax West. As you all know, recent immigrants to Canada and minority groups have unique needs from the federal government. So it's essential that this Larry-Utek area remain in Halifax West. Second is the objection received from the community of St. Margaret's Bay. The boundary that separates Halifax West from the riding of South Shore St. Margaret's was significantly altered in the Commission's final report. This boundary divided the community of St. Margaret's Bay, which is a distinct historical, cultural, and societal community and should not be divided. It has existed as one community since it was settled in 1780. I'm reading verbatim of what the residents sent me. So residents are concerned that the boundary does not respect historical patterns of previous electoral boundaries. In all of the previous federal riding boundary changes, St. Margaret's Bay from Hubbard's to Peggy's Cove has never been split. Furthermore, the residents are concerned about the fact that their community was divided in 2 when this move was not required due to population growth. The residents I've heard from have asked that St. Margaret's Bay remain united in the South Shore St. Margaret's riding, a riding which is named in part after the community. Procedural, there was no in-person hearing in Halifax West to directly ask residents how their boundaries should change, although it was this riding's growth that precipitated changes to neighbouring electoral boundaries. I attended the 1 virtual hearing the Commission held in the province of Nova Scotia, and advised the Commission that they should keep historic communities of interest united in the federal ridings. I didn't hear anyone suggest or advocate for the boundaries that the Commission proposed for Halifax West. The changes I'm objecting to occurred in the Commission's final report and were not present in the Commission's initial proposal. So we're simply asking them to revert back to kind of what they had suggested. So these surprise changes have violated the principle of procedural fairness for these residents, and they've asked me to use my position as the Member of Parliament to make sure their voices are being heard in this process. So to conclude, in my 5 minutes, I've aimed to give an overview of my objections to the Commission's final report. More detail can be found in the documents that were submitted and translated in both languages. Preserving the St. Margaret's Bay community and the Larry Utek community would affect neighboring ridings, but would keep them all within the population variance that is described in the legislation. So again, thank you very much to the Federal Electoral Boundaries Commission for Nova Scotia for all their concerns. Thank you to the committee that's here, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Excellent. Thank you so much for those comments. Mr. Baptiste, up to 5 minutes for you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, colleagues. I'm going to jump right into my objections. But first, I wanted to read a quote from Elections Canada website that was tabled 20 years ago, but it says, Aboriginal people can make a strong claim that the federal electoral system perpetuates their exclusion. It's a bold statement, but I plan to show why that statement is still true today when we have, after 20 years, and that there are improvements that we need, and I'm seeking your help to remedy today. I have 5 grounds for my objections. Firstly, that the Commission, there was a lack of procedural fairness for affected communities, that the Mi'kmaq communities of Eskasoni and Wamatcook and Member 2 in Sydney, the ties were not considered. It was done without any consultation from impacted Mi'kmaq communities. The Commission did not take into consideration Indigenous languages in the same way as other historical minority language communities, and the work is not aligned with the practice of other electoral commissions. So I'm going to get into the procedural fairness back, because I only have really the opportunity to talk about 3 of the reasons why this is procedurally unfair. Usually, if you're going to make big changes, you do so at the beginning of the process. You say, this is what we're proposing, giving people a chance to actually have their feedback listened to and to give people a sense of where you're going. The first recommendation, the proposals to Sydney, Victoria, had 0 changes, no changes. And based on a consultation with a handful of people, which asked that they make a urban versus rural riding in Cape Breton, this was accepted. But it's very strange that they would do so at the second report without giving the affected communities any chance of having the ability to know that this was coming. I call it procedural catfishing, if anyone understands the catfishing phrase. But one of the biggest things that I'm looking at is when you heard the testimony of people saying that we should make an urban area for the municipality. The only place that was suggested that they remove from that riding was the largest Mi'kmaq community of 5,000 voters. The community that is my home. And I believe that the moment that the Commission heard that the only region that they were being asked to remove from the municipal riding was the Mi'kmaq community, that at that point they're triggered a duty to consult. It's under Article 19 of the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act that we just passed requires that administrative boards that make a decision that impacts Indigenous communities, that the free, prior, and informed consent of that Mi'kmaq community is needed. And I could go into the laws around consultation, but I don't have the time on this. But what we're seeing here is a decision that the Mi'kmaq community had 0 opportunity to weigh in on. I have a letter here from all 5 Cape Breton chiefs that object to this. If you're looking at the Nova Scotia, 66% of the on-reserve population is in the riding of Cape Breton. Besides the idea that there was no consultation in Eskasoni has a deep connection to Sydney area, I want to go into what other electoral commissions have looked at. If you look at commissions in British Columbia, the most recent provincial election, they've said that they want to follow the principles of UNDRIP as part of their mandate. In Nova Scotia, the provincial boundaries looked at not only Acadian communities, Mi'kmaq communities, but also African Nova Scotian communities. But I think the biggest and the best evidence of this was in the Ontario most recent Far North electoral riding, where it said Indigenous representation must be given more weight in light of past injustices. There's only been a handful of First Nations MPs in the history of this country who live on a reserve. There's not a lot of Indigenous MPs in this country, and we're seeing why, because of these electoral processes that are doing it. So I'm telling you that I'm really here to say that the Commission's report is inconsistent with the law and the practice of commissions across this country, and that these changes weren't justified, as my colleague, Mr. Fraser, has already stated. You know, we have an opportunity today to end that. We have an opportunity today in this committee to end the historic belief that these electoral boundary systems and these systems have perpetuated Indigenous exclusion. Indigenous communities, when they look at this, the overwhelming question that I get asked is, how could they do this? In an era of UNDRIP, in the era of reconciliation, how can a commission, without any consultation or any hearing from that Indigenous community, remove the only Mi'kmaq-speaking member of Parliament, the only Mi'kmaq member of Parliament ever in the history of Canada to be elected, take away his home community? And so my timer says I'm up. I'm asking that you guys make the commission look at this, and I'm asking for the precedent to be set today that an Indigenous member of Parliament, Indigenous communities have the right to be consulted when the administrative board, like electoral boards, makes the decision that adversely affects them. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's good that the time zones have realigned. That's perfect. We're going to start with 6-minute round, starting with Mr. Perkins.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your presentations and for bringing these matters to the committee. And as Minister Fraser noted, as a fellow Nova Scotian, we all share the desire to make sure we have effective representation, the Supreme Court term, for all Nova Scotians. And as a fellow Nova Scotia MP, I have no doubt that you were all aware of the process the Commission undertook for public consultation. And like other provinces, residents had the opportunity to share their views with the Commission in written format and or speak at the in-person hearings or go to a virtual hearing. All residents in Nova Scotia had ample time to share their views with the Boundary Commission during the consultation process in the spring, which ran for several months. The Commission vigorously advertised their locations, times, and dates of the 9 in-person public hearings and 1 virtual meeting. I know me, and I'm sure you were, as a responsible MP, also promoted the date, time, and location of the 1 hearing that was held in my riding in Bridgewater, which, by the way, was an hour and a half from each end of my riding for it, yet I had 25 people in my riding show up because of the profile we gave it, much further distance than all 3 of you had to this hearing. And in fact, in my case, Shelburne County was being suggested radically to be moved to another riding, and yet those residents came an hour and a half to the meeting. So there were over 1,000 written submissions that were given by Nova Scotians to the Commission in addition to the public hearings. So the claims that your constituents were not aware, I find inconsistent with what the Commission actually did and what the process was that they followed in all 10 hearings. I'll try and make a statement here to go through all of this. There's a lot you've brought forward. In fact, of note was that the one held in Antigonish was roughly 40 minutes from the population center of Pictou County, and the one in Truro was roughly 40 minutes from Pictou County. My constituents had way more distance to travel than yours did, Mr. Fraser. And Ms. Diab, the one in Sackville was only 15 minutes from your riding and a little further from the riding of Halifax and the others. But yet there were lots of representatives of those communities at those ridings. And Mr. Batiste, Eskasoni is only a half hour from Sydney, and Member 2 is only 4 minutes from where the hearing was held. So, Mr. Batiste and Ms. Diab, you didn't go to the public hearings to hear anything. And Mr. Batiste, you didn't attend the virtual hearing, Ms. Diab did, and I don't believe either of you even wrote a speech. My colleague, Dr. Ellis from Cumberland Colchester, who saw absolutely no change like you, Mr. Batiste, proposed, took the time and effort to appear before the Commission. So now you're asking us as parliamentarians to interfere with the neutral process of a commission chosen and vetted by the Speaker It seems very strange to me that you would want to rewrite this open process. And the Commission laid out their challenge for the public in their first report and their second report. The massive population increase in the Halifax Regional Municipality was their primary concern. And Ms. Diab, your riding receiving the highest, way above the 25% limit, and the continual erosion over the decades of population in Cape Breton, trying to balance those two issues. So they, in my view, the Commission restored the historic wrong done in the 96 and 2003 redistributions to all these ridings, and now you're now petitioning against. From Confederation until the 1996 and 2003 redistributions, in my riding, St. Margaret's Bay, was the bay was always split in two on the Lunenburg County line, right through the middle of the bay, separating the eastern part of the bay from the western part of the bay. It was that way from Confederation until only 20 years ago, so you're incorrect. And they are very different histories. Huguenots on one side and foreign Protestants on the other. I actually live on that bay. Before 2001 redistribution, Mr. Fraser, Antigonish County was, as part of the municipal area known as the Strait Area, was historically part of Cape Breton ridings. In fact, from 69 to 97, Antigonish was part of the Cape Breton's Highland Canso, meaning Antigonish was part of the Strait region. This seat was held by former Deputy Prime Minister Alan McEachen with that community in it, and I think he was able to represent that very well. I think you would agree with that, as well as former Liberal Senator, now deceased, Al Graham. The reuniting of old industrial Cape Breton also corrects a historical wrong where for many decades we had one population in that riding, an urban riding and a rural riding. And the urban community of interest of the new Sydney Victoria balances the rural community interest of the other new riding. Now, in terms of the Indigenous population, those two current ridings, now Sydney Victoria has 10% Indigenous population and Cape Breton Canso has 7.4%. In the riding, it's essentially flipped. So the new Sydney Victoria has 6.7% and the new Cape Breton Canso riding has 10%. So if you were able to represent it well before, I don't see the difference. The relationship and the percentage of the populations in those two ridings have been flipped, but they're basically the same. And at the public hearing, former NDP MP supported the change in Sydney Victoria, as well as the former Liberal mayor of the area of Cape Breton. So I think there's a challenge here in claiming that the Commission did not hold the hearings, was not public, that people didn't know. I believe that's a false claim.
So I'm going to cut their time at 6:07. You've received your full time. For all MPs who are, I'm sure, glued to their TVs, if you follow the Act, which I just want to make sure, just in that whole concept and the conversation that was, Mr. Perkins, that you shared, this is part of the process. It's in the Act. So there's public consultations that take place. A report is filed to the House of Commons. That report is then sent to committee. We have 30 days where MPs can look at that report, and then we have 30 days for objections. I was concerned when it came to objections. Turns out objections can be for or against. It doesn't all have to be against. But we are entirely following the process. PROC did not ask to do this work, but within the Act, we have to do this work, and we take our work very seriously here. For MPs who have taken the time to follow the processes, you get 5 minutes. But if you choose to substitute for one of your committee members, you don't have to get 10 signatures, you don't have to follow the process, and you get 6 minutes if you get the first round. And that's kind of what I've just learned. So you will not get time to respond to that, which I regret, because usually we have a really good exchange at this committee. So hopefully you have an opportunity to do that. I will try to provide you some time to ensure that you can counter some of the conversation, because this is a discussion. We have an obligation on this committee to report back to the House with what has been provided to us, and I take that very seriously, as I'm confident all members here do. With that, Mr. Fergus, up to 6 minutes.
Merci
Thank
beaucoup,
you.
Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I do appreciate the points you've raised and the points that have been raised by our colleagues. I'd like to thank my colleagues from the House of Commons for all their presentations this morning. They've been very fulsome, and Mr. Williamson and the three of you.
Who are watching us at home, we were provided sort of a guidance. All members of Parliament were provided a guidance in terms of what type of questions we should be asking. And these are all very important questions, but I think many of the questions have been answered by your presentations this morning in terms of what your rationale was, in terms of does your objection have community support. All three of you have spoken to that. And what are the demographic consequences of what you're proposing? These are all issues which you have very cogently laid out in your presentations. I think I was particularly taken with Mr. Baptiste, your notion or the use of the term catfishing, because I actually don't know what that meant. I did not know what that meant, and I had to go look that up. And when I took a look at that and saw that that's a process of luring somebody into a relationship by a fictional persona. In other words, what you were saying, and what all three of you were saying, is that there were an initial proposal by the Commission, Nova Scotia Commissions, which pretty much was acceptable to a large number of your populations. As a result, no one was particularly bothered by it. And then, after those consultations, they introduced something very different from what was originally proposed, which of course then sets people's hair on fire, and they didn't have an opportunity to come back and to let the Commission know, because that process, that public consultation process, is over. So, to all three of you, Mr. Fraser, where are the representatives from the cities? Where are the representatives from the Indigenous and historic Black communities in Nova Scotia feel about the changes that in your riding? Mr. Baptiste, how does a separation of or splitting up of Indigenous communities, historic Mi'kmaq communities, have an effect in terms of their representation in the House of Commons? And Ms. Diab, again, about the notion of procedural fairness, how does that affect the demographics within your riding and within your larger communities?
Sure. Look, Madam Chair, how much time do we have? Okay. There's 10 municipalities in my riding today. One of them is Halifax Regional Municipality, which has a very small share of the population, big geography. All other 9 municipalities have registered their objection, both with the process and the outcome. The town of Westville, just to address Mr. Perkins' comments, described the process as fatally flawed, that did not give a proper opportunity for their input. In fact, the room booked was too small to accommodate the people who showed up. There was a signal sent to folks who did not actually submit anything in writing that they initially wouldn't be given the opportunity to speak. So municipal representatives have indicated to me that they didn't have the opportunity, and had they shown up, they didn't think they were going to be let into the room. It was not about how far away they had to drive. And the message at home is, if you think Arisag and Ingonish belong in the same riding, you're crazy, particularly when that breakdown was not put to people initially at the time of the Commission. There was not a consultation held in the new proposed Pictou Eastern Shore riding, which is inappropriately named in any event, and people did not feel they had the input, not because it was too far to drive, but because of the rules that were laid out, signaling to them they would be excluded.
So in my case in Halifax West, again, what was initially proposed is totally different than what the outcome is. What was initially proposed, people were ready, to live with. So I want to agree with my colleague. When you propose big changes like this, do it in the beginning so people realize and are able to make submission. There wasn't one in-person submission in Halifax or Halifax West, which geographically and population-wise is the largest riding. Particularly on Mr. Perkins and on the St. Margaret's Bay, I was actually shocked of how many people have contacted me. Head of St. Margaret's Bay, Bootlear Sport Recreation Association, Bay Community Centre, HRM District 13 Councillor, Seniors Association of St. Margaret's Bay Board President, St. Margaret's Bay Chamber of Commerce President, Twin Bays Coalition, Healthy Bays Network Chair, Community Enterprise Centre President, Community Enterprise Centre Volunteers, St. Margaret's Bay Tourism Association. 2 letters, Gary Birchall, lobster fisherman and boat tour operator. Rob Footer, resident in Glen Martin. Yvonne and Wendy Medor, Indian Point Young Naturalist Club. St. Margaret's Bay Stewardship Association. Resident of Glen Haven. St. Margaret's Bay Housing Association. Several people there. Blue Nose Engineering, and I can go on. And some of them told me in the email, because I don't know these people, and I don't know the groups because I don't represent that area, that they've copied Mr. Perkins. So he knows. And this is all this is all coming down now. And they told me they've taken an ad and putting it in, I don't know what local paper you have, because I'm not in that community, to let their community know, because they are scared to death. According to the letters I received, they want to be in that community. They call themselves South Shore St. Margaret's, and the St. Margaret's people want to stay in the South Shore St. Margaret's.
I think in answering Mr. Fergus's question, yes, that the zero changes initially to the riding, I think, was the reason why they had such poor turnouts in the Sydney area, with just a handful of people showing up. But if those handful of people showing up are allowed to come to a presentation and say that we should keep all of the Cape Breton Regional Municipality the same, but exclude the largest Mi'kmaq community of Eskasoni, I feel that creates a suspicion that the Commission should have said, okay, well, let's hear what Eskasoni has to feel about it. Because Eskasoni has deep ties economically to Sydney and Membertou and the areas of Wamitcook that are being taken out of this. That is why they all feel like this process is very suspicious. And if you had asked Indigenous communities, would they have known that this was even possible? They wouldn't have, because I'm the first Mi'kmaq ever to be elected. And these process under that would have...
When I get another term, I want to talk about the immigrant population.
Okay, listen. No, that's the beauty of sometimes being interrupted. I know I was going to let you finish your thought, but with that, we're going to go to 6 minutes with Madame Goudreau.
Ms. Goudreau, thank you, Madam Chair. It's true that we could speak about this in great length. I'd like to focus on a point that you brought up initially, and it has to do with the service provided to citizens. Why am I raising that? Because I think what is evident in Quebec and elsewhere, this is an issue. So what I'd like to know, and allow me first to say that I'm speaking to you about your ridings because last summer I had the great pleasure, before Fiona, to come to your part of the world. So I just wanted to say that I was very pleased to be able to go there. But what I'd like to hear you speak to is this. What should our commissioners be thinking about and be taking into account when MPs are concerned about services being rendered within their communities?
Merci pour la question.
Thank you for the question. And apologies if I answer you in English.
Is laid out in the legislation. Population equity is one of the criteria, and the legislation provides for a permissible 25% variance. It seems that the Commission made a decision to pursue a smaller rate of variance. You can exceed 25% in extraordinary circumstances. I would suggest Mr. Battiste's submissions indicate extraordinary circumstances to include Indigenous peoples in the process. The change to my constituency is changing it from a variance of 16-point-something% to 13-point-something%. Not a meaningful change. But where they've failed, in my view, is on those other issues, serviceability of ridings, communities of interest. What I'm very concerned about is there is very little commonality between the rural issues in the small towns and rural communities I represent today around the fishery, around agriculture, around the mining sector, around small town needs, compared to suburban Halifax, which is beautiful communities, but have a very different economy and different needs. By engaging people in the process to understand what the needs of communities are, to ensure a Member of Parliament's time will be deployed in a way that effectively serves their interests, I think we could have come up with a much better, more successful map that accommodated feedback from First Nations communities, that accommodated feedback from African Nova Scotian communities, that accommodated feedback from the plethora of municipalities who are outraged at the proposal. I've taken up too much of my time, so I'll share with Mr. Batiste.
I guess when looking at this, when we look at the Indian reserves, they are federal jurisdiction. They get all of their services from the federal government, from housing, from social development to education, all of that. And so we've seen provincial boundaries that have taken into consideration Francophone communities, Black communities, ethnic communities, and Indigenous communities. Only one of those has a constitutional status that makes federal government directly linked to that. If provinces are taking into consideration language rights, if they're talking about effective representation, federal government had a responsibility to look at Indigenous communities and Indigenous representation based on the constitutional status of Indigenous people. The fact that they said that we're going to have an open process and anyone can come has been proven to not reach that duty to consult. Under the Mikisew Cree case in the West, they had an open forum on Parks Canada, but the community said we needed our own distinct consultation, and that's why Mikisew Cree failed. And so the legal case is already there for just saying that this is the duty that is responsible, and I feel that this committee has a responsible oversight to look at this commission and say they didn't turn their mind to Indigenous issues, and in the era of reconciliation and UNDRIP, that's wrong.
So for Halifax West, I talked about the St. Margaret's Bay, but let me talk about the newcomer immigrant population. Halifax West is the most diverse ethnically, linguistically riding of the province and has been for decades. They're decimating that, or desecrating that. I don't know the English word. So the law allows plus or minus 25%. In fact, currently Halifax West has over 25%. But what they're doing now is bringing me lower, not even. So even to do what we're proposing is still well within any numbers if you want the numbers. But even the communities themselves and newcomers and cultural, they have no idea. I mean, when I was talking, they would have no idea they're supposed to go out and make representation. I mean, a lot of the stuff didn't affect them anyway. I think all three of us are on the same page here in this, and I'm sure they did their best, but that's kind of what we got, and we're asking for them to relook based on what we now know is their final product, which was not envisioned in their original submission. And it's all a learning curve for everybody, and I'm sure as a result of that 10 years from now it'll be a bit different, because I don't think most of us realized you should object or file things if you agree. Certainly most people would not. Indigenous would not. Minorities would not.
Donc, en conclusion.
So then, to summarize, because I have 20 seconds left, what I'm hearing is that the criteria should be prioritizing this, given the demographic nature of these areas. In many cases, and I just want 20 seconds, in many cases, you want to be able to encourage movement of populations, but not to the detriment of communities. And I think you'll probably see that the same is happening elsewhere. And I'm listening to you, and I hear you, and I thank you.
So I'm just going to, this is really good. And I think it's nice when people do the work and come here well informed and engaged. There's no shortage of time that we need to fill up. So I think we make our points and then we can have more rounds of questioning, because I know more people want to jump into this exciting conversation. Up to 6 minutes for you, Madame Blaney. Mrs. Blaney.
Well, thank you, Chair. So my first question through the Chair, of course, is to MP Diab. I'm trying to understand, could you clarify, is the solution that you're proposing to extend the boundary of South Shore St. Margaret's into the city of Halifax or somewhere else?
So in relation to that side of the boundary, what the residents want is to leave the status quo as exists now. And it was the status quo that what the residents, and I've listed you over 19 submissions I've received so far. And right now, the status quo is well within the population numbers, but also they're saying their community of interest is best represented with their namesake of St. Margaret's Bay, South Shore St. Margaret's.
I have no more questions. Thank you, Chair.
And it would still be within the population size of plus or minus 25%. In fact, it's even much less than that.
Excellent. Thank you for that. That was great. Mr. Prickens, up to 5 minutes for you.
Thank you. That was interesting. So maybe I'll just start off by saying I'm still surprised at your surprise at the fact that there would be change out of a consultation when more than 1,000 Nova Scotians wrote and many, many more participated in the live hearings, that wouldn't result in change. Of course it would. That's the purpose of consultation. And so if you attended the in-person meetings, you would have heard the commissioner say that this is the beginning of the process. It's the starting point. We're looking forward to community input, and we will change based on what we hear in the community input. And that's exactly what they did. So, Ms. Diab, there are lots of quotes from those public hearings from 2 former city councillors as well that said this part should not be in the South Shore. The historic boundary, just so you know, is between Halifax County and Lunenburg County. That line goes right through the center of St. Margaret's Bay. That's existed for about 300 years as a county line. And that's the line that was changed in the 97 to 2003 redistribution after being in since Confederation, because they are historically different. They're also municipally different. And there are a lot of quotes I can go through from those hearings that I have here. But I know you weren't at the hearing, so you wouldn't have heard them. So I know you've received a few letters. Now, with regard to the 25% issue raised about the plus or minus 25%, there is flexibility. The initial proposal, all of the ridings were below a 10% variance that came out and the consultation was on. The variance in the new proposal has widened in response to that public consultation from almost 18% over or under in Sydney, Victoria, to now only 10% over in Halifax West. But there are numbers, you can see them in the report. They're all very different. So that was the the response to that. With regard to Larry UTEC, the challenge for that, and as you know, as we all know, that's the fastest growing part of the province, and that was the primary issue for the commission to face, was the growth of that area through Bedford and how it causes a domino effect in the rest of the province with the boundaries. So I'm wondering if first you could comment on the issue that over 1,000 Nova Scotians apparently wasn't enough consultation, and that consultation shouldn't have resulted in some sort of change. I don't know why, when everybody at those hearings in Sydney said there should be a change. Okay. I think it's a great thing that they had so many people turn out, and the one in your riding that they didn't have room. But the commissioner also said all written submissions have equal weight to the ones in person. And all of your communities and all of you as members of parliament had the opportunity to do that, and some of you chose not to do that.
Let me start out by answering. First, on the 1,000 submissions, we're not privy to those. We have no idea who they came from and what they said and what they didn't say. As you know, none of this is was made public. That's one. Two, St. Margaret's Bay, the area you represent, and that I'm here to voice their concern, is the most beautiful place as far as I'm concerned, or they all are, but in Nova Scotia. My God, it's got Peggy's Cove, and it's got so many beautiful places. Who would not love to represent that area? The reason I am here, though, is I was really, really, really surprised by the people who have contacted me during Christmas and New Year's and in January and December when they found this is happening, and were literally, and I don't know these people, and they were saying, you are our only hope, do something. And so that's why I'm here. I'm here to voice their concerns. On the immigrant population, yes. No, they don't know that they could do this or they don't do this. And when you're happy with what you're seeing, even though they wouldn't have, you're not going to pose any, even me right now, I don't like. So I am here to voice those concerns, and I provided what I have to go ahead.
Madam Chair, one of the challenges that I have with the member's argument is that the Commission's report, in the instance of my consultation that was held in Antigonish, actually indicates that they heard feedback that residents did not appreciate their proposal, but they had a hard time making it work with the population, so they chose to do something different. So that they've acknowledged that they've heard something different than they're recommending. One of the challenges that I have is the proposal, when they've adjusted, pursuant to the consultation that they've acknowledged did not represent their decision, is that they've significantly exacerbated the problem and now put something fundamentally different and worse for residents of Antigonish. So previously, Antigonish was connected to a part of Cape Breton. Now it's connected to almost the entirety of the island, despite the fact that in the report they indicate local residents objected to the initial proposal, and subsequently they've made it worse.
Thank you. Mr. Turnbull, up to 5 minutes.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and thanks to our MPs for being here today. So it sounds to me like, there's, I guess I want to say that I understand the comments that were made about the fact that people don't always engage in a process when they don't have an objection. And I think that's, especially if you've been historically marginalized and disenfranchised. I also want to say that I really understood from the testimony that you've given that across each one of your stories here, there seems to be the sense that the first phase and first proposal that was given seemed to kind of lure people into a sense of security around what was being proposed. And then something else was resulted in the second phase after the consultation took place. And now there's really only this process to voice those concerns. So to Mr. Perkins' point, which I found very offensive, to be honest, to say that they're now proposing to interfere, to use that word, I think is just, it's just inappropriate, because this is the actual process that we're following, as the chair has said. So I think you should feel perfectly confident and comfortable in expressing your concerns here at this committee, and I invite you to do so. Is there a systemic bias in this process based on your perspective, Mr. Batiste?
I would say yes, and I would say all of the literature on Elections Canada's site would say yes, that they talk about the historic displacement, they talk about the lack of trust in federal institutions, and we can see why. The reason Eskasoni is the largest Mi'kmaq community is because we took Mi'kmaq communities from all across Nova Scotia, displaced them from their homes, and centralized them into a reserve and hoped that they would die off. They didn't die off. They grew, and now they're the largest Mi'kmaq community. And so when you hear a presentation at a consultation that says, this community maybe have become a little too much of have a little bit too much voice in the institution, we should remove them. It creates a suspicion. It creates a suspicion, and the fact that there is a process, like Mr. Perkins talks about, does not change the constitutional nature of the law, does not change that UNDRIP states that states shall consult and cooperate in good faith with Indigenous people concerned through their own representative institution in order to obtain free, prior, and informed consents before adopting any or implementing any legislative or administrative measures that may affect them. Now, I think there's a reason why they put administrative measures in it. It's because a lot of times the displacement of Indigenous communities has not been done by legislation, has been done by administrative boards. And this is what we're seeing in this situation. And I'm asking that this committee look at that and say, never again should an Indigenous community be displaced without their consent and without their consultation.
So if I'm interpreting you correctly, and I think I am, that duty to consult must be more proactive and it means a lot more than what you've seen in this process. Can you describe what that really means, and how would the process look different in your eyes if it was to be actually procedurally fair?
Well, I think Ontario got it right when they said that they have to look at historical injustices and give more weight to Indigenous representation based on the history of this country. I think that if the Commission would have went in with a mandate or even turned their minds at all to Indigenous communities, they're not mentioned once in this Commission's report. And the fact that Indigenous communities, Indian reserves, get all of their services from the federal government, not the provincial government, shows there was an increased amount of reason why these federal commissions should have taken into consideration, and they just didn't. And the fact that this may result in litigation because of that is something that I think that this committee has the opportunity today to make remedy before it goes into that situation.
Thank you. So in terms of the act, because there's an act that governs over this particular process, right, which is the Electoral Redistribution Act, Electoral Boundaries Redistribution Act, should that be amended as well coming out of this process in your view, based on UNDRIP?
I think that once UNDRIP passed, it was part of the law immediately. Once we passed C-15, that this was an article in there that should have been respected, and the fact that it's new law doesn't change the fact that it was law, and the commissioners should have known that there was a part of this that needed to have Indigenous participation.
Madam Chair, do I have any time left? 5 seconds. Thank you.
Madame Goudreau, à vous.
Ms. Goudreau, you have the floor. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to use my 2.5 minutes to provide my colleagues with an opportunity. Given that members of the Commission are listening, what would you say your greatest concerns are? What is the message you want to get through to the members of the Commission?
I thank them for their work and think they were trying to do something important with rebalancing the population. But where I think they missed the mark is that they have separated communities that share common bonds, and that's going to lead to worse outcomes for people who live in communities. Frankly, it makes no sense for me to show up here as a small town and rural guy to say that I should not have suburban Halifax, which tends to support our party. I'm asking to maintain like economies as between rural communities and small towns. If we have representatives who can bring a focus to their work to support the needs of their community members that share those common bonds, I believe Canadians will be better off.
I'll just say that I thank them for their work, but I'm excited that they have the opportunity, that we have the opportunity to send a clear message. And that clear message is that the systemic racism and failures in the past to ensure Indigenous representation stops today. It stops with this commission. It stops with this precedent that says never again will Indigenous people feel like they're an afterthought. Never again will Indigenous people feel that they're purposely being removed, because we make a decision today at the start of this process with Nova Scotia that says Indigenous representation is important, but it's also if there is a decision that impacts an Indigenous community, they have the right to be heard. Nothing without us, nothing about us without us is the premise that Indigenous communities have stated over and over again. They have an opportunity to right this wrong, and I hope they turn their mind to doing that.
So I would agree with all of those and really thank the Commission, because their job is very, very difficult. I would say Nova Scotia is turned around the corner, and you cannot disenfranchise the diverse communities that Nova Scotia now represents in terms of culture, in terms of languages, in terms of all of that stuff. And this area that I represent right now is the hub of many of them, and that needs to be taken into consideration, because newcomers, need to also be included.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That was a very good use of your time.
Mrs. Blaney, to you.
Thank you so much for Mr. Baptiste. So you talked a lot about righting this wrong, and I'm just wondering, in terms of system change, what would you recommend to the Commission around engaging Indigenous voices in a new way?
I would say that any testimony that they hear that talks about an Indigenous community without them in the room requires them to consult with that community. At the point where a commission hears that they should remove an Indigenous community, or that they should split Mi'kmaq communities, that they had the duty to consult. And what my recommendation is for this committee to recommend to the commission is that we set a precedent that says that any Indigenous community that's adversely impacted by a decision around electoral boundaries deserves consultation and deserves to be heard.
That's all my question.
We will continue with 5 minutes to you, Mr. Cooper.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to my colleagues for appearing. Madame Diab, you've made an argument about procedural fairness, and I would just note from Larry Utak to Lower Sackville, 14 minutes. Larry Utak to Cole Harbour, where another hearing was held, 31 minutes. Hubbard's Ravery to Lower Sackville, around St. Margaret's Bay, 43 minutes. Hubbard's to Cole Harbour, 56 minutes. Peggy's Cove to Lower Sackville, 51 minutes. Peggy's Cove to Cole Harbour, 59 minutes. In other words, residents from those areas could get to a hearing in less than an hour, in some instances, a half hour or even 14 minutes, plus, of course, a virtual hearing. So I would submit respectfully on that basis, your procedural fairness argument is rather weak. But Mr. Fraser, you talked a little bit about community of interest and the connection between Antigonish and Pictou County. And I think you raised some valid points in that regard. But at the same time, no federal riding is going to be perfect, or it's often difficult to draw a perfect riding. Sometimes lines have to be drawn in a certain place. And the Commission acknowledged that they heard conflicting input. Some residents supported extending Antigonish into the lower Strait area, which encompasses 4 counties. Others did not. But some of the commonalities, as I understand it, and I'd be interested in your input, between Antigonish and the Cape Breton component of the riding include the common Chamber of Commerce, a health authority that had been in place until recently, a regional hospital, the same public school administration, a community of faith with the head of Catholic Diocese in Antigonish, as well as a radio station, XFM CJFX. So I would just welcome your comments based on my...
Sure. So look, Mr. Cooper, you raise an important point. Local knowledge of Nova Scotia and Cape Breton is really important to understand the point that you're articulating. The Commission acknowledged that the preponderance of submissions during the consultation was opposed to the attachment of Antigonish to Cape Breton. In fact, I agree with you, there's no perfect riding. It's not perfect now. Antigonish community residents actually want the entire of Antigonish County to come back into the mainland of Nova Scotia. The challenge I have with the conflicting evidence you've pointed to is the Commission asserted that they heard some submissions indicating commonalities between Antigonish and the Strait region and Cape Breton. They're not proposing to annex Antigonish only to the Strait region. They're proposing to annex Antigonish to the entirety of Cape Breton Island, except for Sydney and Glace Bay. And if you don't know the map, that's sort of the upper right corner, if you can picture it on a map. Despite some commonalities that are actually very real. If there was a proposal to attach Pictou County, Antigonish, and Port Hawkesbury, I could see that a reasonable person would say maybe that makes sense. Nobody's talking about that, and the population wouldn't presumably work. Otherwise, they may have come up with that kind of a solution. What they're proposing now is to attach Antigonish not just to the Strait region, but all of Cape Breton except Sydney and Glace Bay, including communities that do not have those commonalities.
How much time?
So you talked about minutes. No, you're asked the question. So emotionally,
it is my time. Well, I have a minute. Okay, 20 seconds.
So 1,000 submissions. Nova Scotia now is well over 1 million people, I would say. And people who did not know this was happening or were happy. I mean, Mr. Perkins himself didn't file an objection here. You know, presumably he was okay with the redrawn boundaries. So I guess what I would say to you, particularly, and I'm an immigrant, newcomers, people don't speak the language, so on. You know, it's not about the minutes of how long it goes. It's the fact that they need to know that they should be engaged and this is happening and all of that. There's so much to it than just the minutes.
And thank you, Madame Diab, and I have respect for you, and I certainly wasn't intending to be anything other than I respectfully find your argument on procedural fairness question a little bit wanting. But that's my opinion. Mr. Fraser, when I am looking at essentially what you're asking for, it's essentially the reestablishment of your current riding. So if, for example, Antigonish was put back in Central Nova, or whatever name the commission is, Pictou, Eastern Shore, what impact would that have on Metro Halifax, which is the fastest growing region, obviously by far, in Nova Scotia?
It depends on what consequential decision a commission would take on the other side of the riding. If you added Antigonish back into Central Nova and did not change the proposal near Halifax, it would still be below the average population. If you maintained the existing boundary rather than extending to Halifax, it would be below the average to a greater degree. If the commission said we'll put Antigonish back in and extend it all the way to the city, there are still some challenges, but either leaving the boundary as it was on the Halifax side of the riding or extending it as they proposed would still keep them within, just slightly below, actually, the average population across Nova Scotia would be. I'd have to check the math to be exactly sure because I don't know the precise population of each community, but in either way, it would not create challenges from a population point of view, if that's what your question was. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you. Mr. Turnbull, I believe I'm coming to you.
Thanks, Madam Chair. So it sounds to me like the notion of consultation is kind of in question here. It sounds like seems to be an issue with the process, that everyone's taking issue with the process. And just myself, having been someone who specialized in consultation processes, it always occurred to me that the design of those processes is important, and the communication strategy around them is really important. So just because you advertise something on the radio or host a public hearing of some kind and put a notice up doesn't mean that people are necessarily going to be included. And I think that's something that I'm hearing across all of the comments that you're making. So I'm just that's a remark more than anything. But I think, Mr. Batista, I wanted to ask you specifically, were any of the Indigenous communities that you've spoken to today specifically reached out to and invited to participate in the consultation process?
Not at all. This came as a complete shock to them. And I would say that if they were given the opportunity and told specifically, I would ask what accommodations were they made. I come from a Mi'kmaq community that speaks largely the Mi'kmaq language. For them to come to a commission report of people who don't speak their language, trying to find transportation there, assuming that they have a car, assuming they have access to that transportation, which normally Indigenous communities don't have, what would be the odds of them going into an area filled with non-Mi'kmaq people where they would be expected to address electoral boundaries in English language, in a process they aren't familiar with, by themselves? I just don't believe that would have happened. And there's a reason why there's systemic racism embedded within the system, because they're not meant to accommodate Indigenous peoples. And many provinces have seen that as an obstacle and been proactive in doing something about it. This commission did not.
Mr. Fraser, do you want to add to that?
Sure. One of the things that you've got to appreciate about rural Nova Scotia the last couple of years as well is our daily newspapers have become weeklies. Our radio stations, with the exception of 989 XFM, thanks for the shout out, Michael, have become syndicated, and they don't cover local content the way they used to get people out to events even 3 or 4 years ago. Just to put it into perspective, I just pulled up on my phone the resolution that the town of Westville passed in objecting to the Commission's proposal. They described the consultation process as being rushed and failed to allow for adequate input from the residents and elected leaders of Westville. They described the process as fatally flawed. New Glasgow, Trenton, Pictou, Westville, Pictou County, the county of Antigonish, the town of Antigonish, the district of St. Mary's, all after the fact have said this is no good for us. Had they had the opportunity, been made aware and been given space, they all would have said that at the outset. So I really question the ability in a short-term with some modest advertising to actually hear from the voices. I think you need to deliberately engage people, particularly those who represent thousands of other people. I think it was a missed opportunity, and I think it should be revisited.
Thank you. Ms. Diab, do you want to also add to that? Because that long list of organizations that you read out seems to me it's pretty hard for any member to suggest that the consultation was done. Like, how could you have that many people that are now upset about the process if the consultation were fair and inclusive?
So again, I read out that list, and that specifically from that St. Margaret's Bay side. Once they were familiar with what's happening, they started reaching out, and they reached out to each other. I mean, I didn't. It wasn't me going to them. They found out, and they were doing that, and they were very concerned. But in terms of the newcomer and immigrant population, I mean, we have a mosque. We have churches, we have, they're not going to come out with this unless we're specifically, and originally there was really no reason to go to some of these communities because Halifax West's population currently is over 25%. And that precipitated decreasing and changing boundaries. But what they came up with now is I'm even less. The riding of Halifax West as proposed is now even less than an average. Yes.
Thanks, Ms. Diab. I don't want to cut you off, but I just wanted to add, it seems to me that it's only when you divide a community of interest or a community of identity, which is one of the key core concepts that are embedded in the legislation as part of the Boundary Commission's work, right? It's sort of centered on those concepts, in addition to some others. But it seems to me it's only when you get, when you really try to divide those natural communities that sort of occur, that you get these outcries from communities. So it's sort of no surprise to me that there wasn't an initial outcry and a need for a lot of engagement, and that naturally it would come later if they were proposing something that didn't make sense for the people that are in those places. So, and I think that's what we're hearing from you, if I'm not mistaken. So I think I'm out of time. I guess I can't pose another question yet, but appreciate your comments.
You got it? You sure you want a quick question? Excellent. Excellent. I really do appreciate this time that we've all had together. I just want to get on the record of the 6 questions that we shared with you. I think I did get answers to the one, but I just want to confirm. Is there a domino effect to the surrounding ridings occurring from the changes you are proposing? Can I get a quick yes or no?
So in my circumstance, when all well within the population as the act and the law suggests, all below. So there's.
In my instance, there is not on the Cape Breton Antigonish side. There could potentially be, depending on what decision would be taken towards Halifax.
No, as long as they were following the same ridings as they would currently have, they would have no impact except for in Central Nova.
Thank you. And the second question I just want to confirm is, have you talked to your colleagues about these proposed changes? If so, do they agree?
So on my side, there's 2. The one is where Mr. Perkin is here, and you've heard the evidence on that part. The second one is Sackville, Chesapeake Cook, and they are completely aware of what I'm doing here today, and there's agreement.
Look, Jaime and I are aligned, and we are talking about the same boundary from Cape Breton on that side. I've spoken with my Nova Scotia colleagues. There could be some nuances, and I think people would need to see what those final decisions are. But from a principled point of view, there's not an objection to me maintaining a boundary or moving a little bit along the eastern shore of Nova Scotia.
All 8 Liberal Nova Scotia MPs have signed my objection, as well as 30 others from across the country who saw this as wrong, and so I have spoken to them, and they are in agreement.
Excellent. And so today was the first day. So I want to thank you for your time. You're welcome to stay, and you're also welcome to go. We'll be wrapping up within the next minute. Today was the first day of us going through this process. I think it's really important for us to note that this is a process that PROC is tasked with. So I just want us to be mindful of people who are coming to share the comments and concerns, and that we are representing, and we've framed a series of questions to ensure that we stay within the scope of the work that we are doing, which is actually very important work, which I know we all take seriously. The second thing I want to note is any documents that are provided to this committee will be put together and reported back to the House and goes to the Commission. Everything. We don't get to choose what we want to send or not send. Any supporting documents that you provide to us, such as those letters of reference that you're referring to, come to the committee. We report it back to the House. All of it will be reported back to the Commission. This committee is tasked with listening and engaging, asking tough questions for the most part, sharing some comments and concerns, and then we report back to the House. And then the House will be reporting that back to the Commission, because this is part of a process that is part of the Act, and it is an entire process that really has a lot of value and importance. You can look at historical, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and what's kind of happened, but this is a really important process, and we're just beginning it today. We get to go through the rest of the provinces, which I know we're all so excited about. You can hear it in my voice. So I would just be mindful of remembering kind of where are we getting questions, where are we kind of getting to. I think our personal information is important as well, but we should really take time to perhaps having some of those questions so we can get out of these conversations really what needs to be brought to the Commission's attention, what your ridings need us to hear, province need to hear, and so forth. But I really do want to thank us all for such a first good PROC in 2023, and I look forward to many, many more. So with that, keep well and safe, and keep amazing. Take care.